Here we will examine how the previous examples of equal harm power symmetries can degenerate into power asymmetries. Example 6. Imagine what would have happened during the Cold War if one side had nuclear weapons and the other did not, all other things equal. The side with nuclear weapons would be able to, by that very fact, dictate its terms to the other side and insist on unconditional obedience. Presumably, seeking to avoid a nuclear holocaust, the side without nuclear weapons would have consented to the imposition rather than risk hostilities, and the Cold War would have ended, at least in the event that the side with nuclear weapons could ensure that the other side would not obtain them. The power asymmetry would then have resulted in the global hegemony of the side with nuclear weapons. Example 7. The equal harm power symmetry in a community where every resident owns guns will be destroyed if the government begins to forcefully disarm the residents. One of two possible power asymmetries can result when the right to bear arms is infringed. Either the population will become entirely disarmed, and the government will not have the resistance of the people as an obstacle to enforcing its impositions, or, as happens more frequently, only a part of the population will become disarmed, namely the law-abiding part. The people who least respect the law will remain in possession of weapons and will be able to wield asymmetrical power over the honest, law-abiding citizens. Gun control policies make crime more lucrative by establishing a power asymmetry between criminals and everyone else. Example 8. The equal harm power symmetry of normal employment relations disappears when either the employee has no other opportunity open to him by his present job, and the employer knows it, or the employer is somehow prevented from dismissing an employee who fails to deserve his pay. The clear sign of employers wielding asymmetrical power over their employees is any manner of compulsion to work without pay, as happens in certain firms that force their employees to work beyond their scheduled times, while failing not only to provide overtime pay, but to provide pay in general for the extra time worked, despite contractual stipulations to the contrary. Employers who have any alternatives comparable to the job in question will not long agree to such terms. But if they remain at their current job, they must think that despite the compulsory unpaid work, their current arrangement is superior to anything else they could find. Nonetheless, the power asymmetry enables certain employers to engage in a clear violation of contract, a violation which is unlikely to be redressed, as the legal costs of doing so would far exceed the overtime pay of which the employer deprived his workers. For an employee to wield asymmetrical power over an employer, he must be in a position to demand more pay than his work alone merits. Typically, this is obtained by means of labor unions, aided by closed shop and union shop laws, which exclude non-union members from competing with unionized laborers. If they are fully voluntary organizations with whom the employer may choose not to deal, labor unions cannot long protect incompetent employees from dismissal. But because of the disproportionate power of labor unions in today's legal system, we can readily observe absurdities, such as General Motors' maintenance of thousands of workers who do absolutely nothing on its payroll, a condition imposed by the union to which these workers belong. Example 9. Any government in which some part is not checked by another part exhibits a power asymmetry that will be increasingly exploited to give some people a vast degree of control over others. While the officials who are privileged by the power asymmetry remain benevolent, tyranny may be postponed for a time, just as a benevolent despot might leave his subjects alone and permit them to prosper for the duration of his reign. But an unchecked government becomes highly lucrative to those who are not benevolent, and who would use it to enrich themselves at others' expense. Thus, over time, detestable characters will assume a disproportionate degree of control over the government. using the latitude given by their offices to exercise arbitrary power over everyone else. The great experiment of the United States Constitution provides the clearest historical demonstration of this tendency. Despite their best intentions, the framers of the Constitution failed to fully check the powers of government. They gave Congress the vague power to regulate interstate commerce, which has gradually become construed as a power to regulate anyone and anything. Similarly, the Constitution's necessary and proper clause has been interpreted to justify whatever actions politicians deem expedient for fulfilling their personal goals and priorities. The Constitution also failed to clearly define the powers of the Supreme Court and to impose compelling limitations on its activities. Thus, the decisions of the Supreme Court have increasingly come to be regarded as the final word on any given matter, immune to all challenges by other political branches and by the people themselves. The power of the U.S. government today is greatly asymmetrical to that of any private individual or even the population at large. The government grows and becomes increasingly intrusive, despite most citizens' clear dislike of those tendencies. Moreover, the American founders' extreme aversion to democracy as a system inherently hostile to individual liberty has been replaced by a nearly universal reverence for the will of the majority, a kind of divine right of elected representatives, which posits that any person with the support of 51% of the voters can do no wrong. The predominant legal consensus of our times holds that any individual freedom or possession can in principle be voted away by enough people. Without even the recognition of the concept of inalienable individual rights as a restriction on collective action, a vast power asymmetry exists between majorities and individuals. Example 10. The way to destroy an equal harm power symmetry in a family is to enact no-fault divorce laws. No-fault divorce laws give a morally unscrupulous spouse asymmetrical power over his or her partner. Under no-fault divorce, one partner can initiate proceedings against the other without that other's consent, and judges are not allowed to question the reasons for the divorce. Thus, the partner against whom the proceedings are initiated can be blatantly expropriated without having had any input in the matter. A loving and honorable spouse would never do this, but an exploitative spouse will. On the other hand, a prohibition on all divorce likewise creates a power asymmetry in favor of the less moral party in a marriage. If a spouse within a marriage that cannot be dissolved wishes to commit adultery or even physically abuse his or her partner, such treatment may continue with impunity. The only institutional approach toward divorce that is compatible with maintaining an equal harm power symmetry within a marriage is consensual divorce, which allows for the dissolution of a marriage only if there occurs some manner of abuse or breach of contract, or if both parties agree to the divorce of their own free will. Likewise, between parents and children, an equal harm power symmetry is absent whenever the law does not protect the individual rights of children. In past eras of history, when many fathers had the legally recognized power of life or death over their offspring, tremendous power asymmetries existed between generations in a family. Today, mothers hold a similar power of life or death over their unborn children. The legality of abortion renders the unborn child one of the most powerless entities today. Such a child can be killed, and no one is permitted to resist the killing. Indeed, the U.S. government funds such killings and protects organizations that actively encourage them.